Hi everyone, I just want to share something with you which I've not really shared before. I've never told my story. So it all started when I was, 16, and I met the person I was with at 16, quite young, and I got pregnant really quick. I was only 16, 3 months later in that relationship I got pregnant. It was a massive shock for me. A real shock. I was so naive and so young. I was still a child. Anyway, time went on, and I made the decision to keep the baby because I had weighed up other choices because of my education and being so young. However, I kind of decided to keep the child. Went to all the parent classes, started to bond, kind of feeling movements, went to the first scan, second scan. I became really excited, really excited. I was actually looking forward to it, and then found out I was having a boy, doing that whole name thinking, what should I call him, what should we call him? So we ended up picking the name Jake, and I always loved that name. I always knew that if I ever had a boy, I would want to call him Jake, and we did. And he was born, about 2 weeks late. He was overdue and had to be induced. It was pretty scary. I had little family support at the time as well, and I just had my partner, and I remember being in the room in labour in absolute agony. Loads of doctors and nurses coming around because they was like, he's a little bit distressed. Anyway, he came out absolutely gorgeous, nearly £9. And yeah, my partner at the time, he was like 6 years older than me, so he knew how to change bottoms, do that whole kind of stuff, because I'd never done it before. I'd gone on these parenting classes, but there's no such thing as you must do this, you must do that. So but it did feel quite innate in me. And within a couple of weeks, I don't know, there was this mother's instinct where I just thought, there's something wrong, something doesn't fit right. My son just didn't, he was crying a lot. I didn't know if that was normal or not. I was so young. And he had this colour on his skin, which it looked, all I can describe it as is like a corned beefy look. And anyway, I took him to the doctors. Doctors said he was fine. They did more tests. They were a bit worried, so we went to a bigger hospital, St James's Hospital. Even one of the surgeons looked under his arms because he thought it was a bit of fatty tissue. His lymph nodes were inflamed. I didn't know that at the time. And the surgeon said, it's just a bit of fatty tissue, nothing to be worried about. All his bloods came back fine. A week later, I remember it so vividly as though it was yesterday. Me and my partner had gone out shopping and left Jake with the mother-in-law. I came back and it just didn't seem right. It was really hot. He just didn't seem okay. And then on that Sunday night, he was up all night crying, and I just thought, I need to take him back to the doctors. So the doctors said, look, we'll take you back up to the hospital. They must have known something, that he wasn't okay, having all of these symptoms of crying, as though it sounded as though he was in pain all the time. I'd taken him quite a lot. It must have been about 8 times altogether to the doctors and hospital. And this particular day, they said, we'll take him up. They did more bloods. But Jake looked delirious. It's the only way. He was in the cot looking. He had these really big blue piercing eyes, which were gorgeous. But it didn't seem as though he was there. Anyway, the doctor came back in and gave me the most heart-wrenching news that any parent would ever hear. The worst news ever, that he had leukemia. Bearing in mind, my son was only 11 weeks old at the time, if not even that. And I'm like, what? He couldn't even go to the toilet. He couldn't go for a wee. They had to kind of do a load of stuff, like kind of inject into his bladder to get the urine out. It was awful. And he just deteriorated. Within a week, he had gone from being this kind of, normally he didn't ever seem kind of okay. But anyway, he'd gone from where he needed to have blood transfusion. We were then sent to the cancer ward where there was a load of other children, which was pretty traumatic looking back. And yeah, and it was horrid. And then they basically, another transfusion, we stayed there, and they were doing, observations, and then we went, this surgeon said we need to do an operation on him because the blood is going into his brain. None of this made sense to me at the time. I was only 17 then, and it was just so traumatic. And Jake was in a coma, in an induced coma, so he could kind of fight for as much as he could. And they did this operation to try and relieve the blood, because the way they described it to me is that if they don't relieve it, his brain will drop down to his neck. And I still remember that. And I don't think at the time I kind of clocked it. It's not until later, after what happened, that it kind of impacted on how I processed things. And then they basically said after the operation, look, within half an hour to an hour, that he's not going to make it. We need to turn the ventilator off. And I was just like, what? I was in complete shock. I didn't know what was being told to me. I had my partner there, his cousin and wife, and we're in this room, and I'm just like, are they telling me that my son isn't going to make it? No, that's not true. Complete denial. I didn't believe anything. At the time, I thought someone were going to jump out and say, this is all a joke, Bernie. But no, that didn't happen. And we were then into the room, and the doctor gave us this big spiel about what will happen if we don't turn it off. That kind of went over, and basically all they said, and I remember it, is that his brain will drop into his neck. And I automatically said, right, no, that's not happening. That cannot happen. He cannot be in that much level of pain. And they said if he does survive, he'd have to then go through all the leukemia treatment, and he wouldn't be okay after. It would have impacted on his brain. He would have probably been in a wheelchair. He would have had a really bad quality of life. It was awful. I mean, I'm not sure what I would do now as being an adult, older, but everyone was basically saying, look, we need to turn this ventilator off. And I kind of agreed at the time. And that happened, and they turned the ventilator off. And that's when most of my heart, half of my heart died that day with him. It was really difficult. And do you know what? There's no words on this planet that they can tell you. There's nothing. I just remember leaving the room after getting his handprints and hair, a piece of his hair, and walking out. I think I collapsed to the floor, if I recall. And I wasn't able to scream or cry. I just felt like lost in the abyss of nowhere. And I remember looking up at the moon, because it was a full moon. And I remember looking up at that, and I was in complete shock, denial, numb, complete numbness. And that, I think it kind of, that experience, the grieving, the numbness, kind of stayed with me for quite a while. And I would say that I developed complex grief because I wasn't able to grieve at the time. I had a load of other stuff going on. It was a difficult relationship. I had stuff going on with the wider family. You must do this, you must not do that. I felt torn in the middle of everything. So I wasn't able to grieve. I wasn't able to kind of process that grief. I was completely lost. I felt like I was a walking zombie. And it wasn't until months down the line I got invited to this beautiful parents event, and I went on my own. I went on my own to it, and I remember them giving me a candle, and that stayed with me for years and years. That candle did, and I eventually burned it on one full moon a couple of years after. But I went through everything. I went through the numbness, the shock, the denial, blame, anger. Anger didn't come until a long time after. And going through all of that, as I say, there's no words. There's no words until you've gone through it and you've processed that grief. And do you know what? It never goes. I can't stand here and say, oh yeah, you'll be fine in 2 years. You'll be fine in 6 years or 10 years, because it's a lie. You will be fine, but the pain is still there. It's still there. And do you know what? That's okay. It is actually okay, because what happened, my epiphany, and what kind of helped me is accessing that grief support and talking to someone who wasn't going to judge me, like, you know, like family or your partner, someone who was able to kind of heal me. I felt like I was healing myself, but also with somebody else. They guided me because they'd gone through something similar. They knew what it was like to lose a child. Until you've gone through that, yeah, you can have empathy as a parent, but until you've buried your child in that ground, you do not know what that pain is like. No one does, unless you've done it. And every grief is very different. Every grief is so different. So people can grieve actually okay. They're open to that kind of level of support. They've got no other stuff going on at home where the partner's going through their own difficulties from trauma or whatever. There's no family dynamics. And yeah, you can do that. You can allow that time. I didn't. I had to shut it, which was really hard. I had no one to talk to. And it wasn't until I moved away from that area that I was able to access support, and I went for grief support, which was quite a few years down the line, grief coaching and grief support. And through all of that and my own kind of experience, I learned how to process grief in a healthy way. I learned the strategies, I learned techniques, I learned to be able to talk about my son without kind of it digging deep right in there, you know, that pit. I'm able to kind of do stuff now for him. But I think the biggest thing, what kind of stayed with me, is my identity. My identity completely changed. I was never, ever the same person after. I was and I still am, it still stays with me now. I kind of feel like that empowered kind of woman. I'm like, I will not take that. It kind of changed my identity as a mum because I had all these expectations. He'll be a footballer, he'll love this, he'll be doing this by now. So you've got all of that. You know, he'd be 27 now. My son would be 27 if he was still alive. And there's all of those thoughts as, oh, would he have gone to uni? Would he be married? Would I be a grandma? That kind of stuff. So there's all of that, what kind of I had to process over the years. And I still, and it's okay, and I still have moments on anniversaries where it can feel really hard. There's no magic pill, there's no magic wand that's going to take that away. It's learning strategies, healing, connecting with someone on your wavelength who can help you. It helped me, but I've also learnt my own way and what I did and what I found helpful. And after, it was finding meaning, finding a purpose. So I then went on to train as a therapist, a bereavement therapist myself, for a charity. I did that, then went on and did social work, all in the name of my son, all in the name of him. Because I think if I'd have not had that experience, I wouldn't be standing here doing this now. No way at all. But yeah, I just wanted to share my story with you. And I know I could talk for a whole day about it because of the trials and the tribulations and everything. It wasn't just a normal ending. Things came up after Jake died, you know, which wasn't normal, you know. And I think now I'm healed. I've got a meaning in my life. I've got a purpose. I have gone on, had other children, which initially I did feel guilty about because there's this whole thing, isn't there? Oh, you know, people judge you. People expect you to get over it. Oh, you can have another child. It might be all okay. No, you're not replacing your child. I went on to have a really healthy child after I've had 3 more. But I have also suffered with 3 miscarriages, which is just as painful, but in different ways. But yeah, and I just want to kind of say there is ways. It don't always have to be like this. It don't always end horribly. You can find purpose and meaning in your life to make a difference for your child, to make a difference for you. So I just wanted to share my story today. Thank you for listening. Take care.